Hey you, welcome to or welcome back to Keisha's house, motivation and inspiration. I'm Keisha, and as always, I am so very glad that you stopped by. So today is Monday, March 27th. It is crazy how quickly this year has flown by. And I don't know about you, but for me, my view out the windows has been a dark and dreary Monday morning. But that's okay. You know, growing up, if you wanted my family to do nothing, have it rain outside. Everyone would be snuggled in, not doing a single thing, but maybe just watching some TV or sleeping the day away. But I realized as I got older, one, we have absolutely no control over the weather outside. So why are we allowing external factors that we can't control us? So whether it's a dark or gloomy day, my household still stays productive. And I hope your day has been productive as well. So last week, we discussed being humble, having humility, recognizing that, well, no one's better than anyone else. We all have different talents, and that's okay. We have different opinions, and that's okay. We may not always agree with everyone, but it's okay. We don't have to agree with everyone. We don't have to agree with each other, but we do need to respect each other's opinions, whether we like it or not. And when we're able to recognize that people will be people, well, some of that frustration that you may have when other people share a view that you do not agree with, it tends to go away. And I can tell you right now, anything that allows me to keep my peace, I'm 100% in. So that is what we focused on last week. Just being humble, staying humble, and just really staying in our lanes. So I'm still reading through the book Grit by Angela Duckworth. It is fantastic. In fact, every single time I'm listening to the book, I listen to a chapter, I just think to myself, man, I'm gonna have to go back, re-listen to this with my notebook. It is that good. And in the specific chapter that I just finished, she talked about how she did some research along with some other professionals as well, but it wasn't until they came up with the GRIT assessment. And what they did was all of the students that went to the Army Academy, I know the Air Force Academy, what is it? West Point. So all the kids that went to West Point, they would allow them to take this GRIT assessment. And what they noticed was that, well, if somebody did well outside of the assessment, if someone checked all of the boxes, they were really strong in their fitness, they had fantastic grades, if they were able to go through all of those steps, that did not mean, or I should say it was not a clear indicator that those students would actually make it through the program. In fact, those that had the most potential tended to quit early on in the program. So that is what drove the need and the want of an assessment of the students to see who was actually going to be successful if they could pinpoint it. And what they found by utilizing the GRIT assessment was that, well, there are just some people that have a little bit more grit than others, meaning your grades and your fitness is not a clear indication about if you can be successful in a West Point program. What it really came down to is what was the motivation, what was the root cause of that individual even wanting to get to West Point? You know, for some people, it is ingrained that failure is just not an option. And when they do come across something that is frustrating, or they're cold and wet and they're stuck outside for hours on end, what is it that's going to drive somebody to stay in that situation? Where most people can recognize, I don't like this and I don't have to be here. So they walk out the door. But what is really interesting to me about this is that, well, they've learned grit is not stagnant. We're not all born with a certain amount of grit, and that's just what we have in life. Grit can be learned. Grit can be earned. And that is exciting. And we'll talk about that more next week. But for this week, the specific focus is on the fact that don't allow people to take a test of you or check boxes that they say you have to fit in this certain mold to determine if you can be successful or accomplish your goals. All of that means nothing. Yes, I get it. We sometimes, if we want to be in a certain program, if we want a certain degree, there might be some preliminary steps, but don't allow anyone to count you out. The author, Angela, she also shared a story about this student, and this one, as a mother, really hit home for me. There was a student that had an ear issue as he was growing up, so he was a little bit delayed necessarily in just not understanding, but not necessarily hearing everything that was being taught to him in school. So from a very early age, the school labeled him as a student that just was having difficulty learning. And there's no problem or issue if you have a difficulty in an academic setting. But the reality is that student's potential was stifled because all of these external people trying to put this child in a box early on. If it wasn't for my parents advocating for me in the very first grade, I too would have been labeled for years. In fact, I remember my mother talking on the phone, overhearing the conversation when I was a child, a conversation I should not have heard, listening to my mother cry to a friend of hers as she explained that the school said that I couldn't learn. And fast forwarding today, being an individual that has multiple higher education degrees, being in a position in my career, none of that should have happened because I was counted out by a select few teachers. In fact, my second grade teacher went on to tell my mother that she felt sorry for me because I had such a pretty face, but basically saying that I wasn't smart enough to accomplish anything in life. They were wrong. Don't allow people to put a label on you and count you out. So as the author was sharing, that student went on for years thinking that they could not learn. And it's also important to say, don't allow people to say things about your kids. Because children, and even us as adults, if somebody labels us in a certain way, we tend to hold on to that label until it becomes true. And that's what happened to this student. He just kept thinking, well, I just can't learn. And it wasn't until another teacher who saw his potential and believed in him pulled him aside and said, what are you doing in my class? And it was from that one conversation that student, something sparked inside him that he decided he was going to find something that he could call his own. So his grandfather actually played a certain instrument, I believe it was violin, and he went to his grandfather and said, I wanted to learn. And the grandfather taught him, and he became very good. And it was in that moment that his life started to turn around. Fast forwarding to today, the man is a rocket scientist. This student that they said couldn't do math is a rocket scientist. Are you allowing people to count you out? Have you accepted the title that people are putting on you and dimming your future? It happens to the best of us. It always happens when we feel most vulnerable. But the reality is, you know your potential. Everybody else around you doesn't need to know. And the reality is, they can't know your potential because they are not you. You know what you could do. You know what your talents are. It's time to show people what that is. So this week's quote, which I held it because again, it was supposed to be last week's quote, and I said no. Last week's quote was the right time. This week, I'm really excited to share this with you. And it's a simple one, but it's powerful. It says, our potential is one thing, but what we do with it is another. Our potential is one thing, but what we do with it is another. Only you know what your potential is. You know what you're good at. It's time to put action behind your worth. Action. It's a choice. Yes, there's stumbling blocks. Yes, there might be some barriers. Yes, we might need to find an alternate route. But that doesn't mean you can't achieve whatever your dream is. So that's our quote for this week. That is the challenge. That is what I've been holding on to for 2 weeks now. Our potential means nothing. It's what we do with it that's most important. So what is it that you've been putting on the back burner? What have you been putting on the shelf? What is it that you wanted to achieve for so long and you've been too scared to do it because you didn't think that you were good enough to do it? It's time. The time is now. Focus on you this week. Dig in, push forward. Remember, you deserve to upgrade yourself, your life, and your future so you can begin living the life you want to live. Till next time, I'll see you soon.